Hello, everyone. This is your host, Susan Rosen, in case you didn't know. And I am here with a guest who was on the show first around the end of last year, beginning of this year. And he's back for another discussion and kind of find out what he's doing right now and how life is treating him. So welcome, Neil McKinley. And I will read your little bio here. And Neil is a meditation teacher and mentor. He's reflecting a long-standing interest in how this work enriches and is enriched by our everyday lives. He offers a range of resources that encourage and empower us to consciously link meditation and daily living, to let the wisdom we touch through our practice come into the world we share. These include 2 online communities, the free to access Living Meditation Network and the subscription-based online gatherings, and the Bringing Meditation to Life podcast, one of my competitors. So welcome back, Neil. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how life has changed and how you've changed. And, 6 months is a long time these days.
6 months,
actually, huh? Yeah.
7 months is a long time, and it's been an interesting span. Shortly after we last spoke, I had been doing interviews throughout the fall, and shortly after we last spoke, I actually paused doing podcast interviews. I think ours was the second to last one I did before this break. I'd enjoyed all the conversations that I had, including ours, but I was beginning to feel that something was missing from my end of the exchange, these exchanges. And so I paused, I took some time to reflect, and I realized that something was missing from my end, and it needed to be integrated in to these conversations, which I've begun doing. And it's had a real interesting impact on my podcast interviews. It's had a really interesting impact upon my work and how I speak about my work. And, last time, we talked about the fact that I am a meditation teacher. I'm a meditation mentor. And, baked into these statements is the fact that I'm also a student of this work. I learned to meditate when I was a teenager, when I was a competitive swimmer. At a certain point, I studied and practiced in a series of 2 communities that were rooted in Tibetan Buddhism, that gave me opportunities to engage formal curriculum, that gave me opportunities to do long retreats. And then around about 2016, my relationship with the second of these communities started to quiver, started to shake and fray a little bit as I began to feel uncomfortable about how the leader was treating specifically his closest students. And by 2018, this discomfort had intensified as it became apparent that in spite of what I believed, in spite of what I'd been told, in spite of what I had told others as a leader in this community, what was driving that situation to my eye was not the teachings of meditation, not the practice of meditation, not the well-being and the development of the students, but really the self-centered impulses of the leader. And the extents that he was willing to go to assert these impulses created, again, to my eye, an environment that was characterized by manipulation and disempowerment and a profound sense of disrespect, fundamental disrespect. And so for all of 2019, I struggled with this. There was struggled with the dissonance between what was going on or what I thought was going on and what I now saw to be happening with my very own eyes. Struggled with the depression and anxiety that arose from having my own inner intelligence undermined so completely, so frequently, such an ongoing way. So I struggled all the way through 2019, and then at a certain point, I became so mentally and physically compromised that I just had to leave. So basically unhealthy that I had to leave, which is what I did in February 2020.
Mm. Well, it's, and I know we kind of touched on this a little bit just before, but you know, my reaction is how good on you that you saw this and put yourself and your family first. You know, that self-care, if we don't take care of ourselves, really nobody else is going to.
Yeah. And it really became apparent that that was the case, that we're continuing to function or try or dysfunction within that environment was no longer, it wasn't even no longer sustainable. It was just no longer possible. And, the choice was to continue to degrade both physically and mentally, or to leave. And so I left, all of which is, a huge portion of life experience that I didn't speak to last time,
Right.
which was the missing piece, I think, in these conversations.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey from that point to where we are now?
Well, it has been and continues to be a journey. I mean, it really, really is the case. And, of course, the first thing is leaving. It's huge. I mean, that is a life-changing event. I'd been part of this situation for 20 years, and February 2020, I walk away. And there was a lot of relief in getting out of that situation, and a lot of loss, an overwhelming amount of loss. I lost a path, I lost peers, I lost livelihood, trust, confidence, direction. There was so much loss, and I really didn't know what to do with this. I wandered a lot. I stared out the window a lot. And there's at least two other things that came into my life, or that were part of my life, that I think are notable. One is that I meditated. And that may sound a bit surprising for a meditation teacher to say, but I really didn't know why I was meditating. I just meditated almost every day. And as I meditated, I started to settle into what was happening for me, not changing, not getting rid of, not finding something other than that lostness, but I started to settle into that lostness. And as I settled in, there was this experience of insight that came. And it was insight, wasn't the kind of insight I might read about in books about meditation, insight into egolessness or emptiness or anything like that. It was insight that often spoke directly to what was happening to me, that lostness. And this suggested to me a phase or an aspect of meditation that I hadn't really recognized before, one in which I allow the revelation that arises out of the settling that meditation brings into my life to actually guide me into the world. And so that's what I started doing, because I had no idea what else to do. And that sounds, I hear that and I think, oh, that sounds a little bit like big words, capital this, capital that, capital. But it was so granular and every day. If what came up was a sense that I was weary, I would rest. If it was a sense of loneliness, I would reach out. And if it was a sense of stuckness, I'd reach out for therapy. I do trauma therapy. I did a lot of EMDR over the last couple of years. So that's one thing. What the first notable that showed up in my life in this time, in a new way. And the second thing worth noting in this regard is that much of this practice that I'm talking about, I did in community. I did with others. Shortly after the end of the 20-year relationship with this problematic mentor, COVID struck. And so if the end of the relationship resulted in 75% of my livelihood ending, COVID took the remaining 25. And so I started offering something online, something that's now the community known as the online gatherings. And this is a group of meditators that support and encourage and inspire one another as we develop a relatable understanding of the teachings and practices of meditation, and do what I just spoke about. Let the revelation that comes out of meditation guide us into our lives.
Yeah.
And under the influence of these two, much to my surprise, I found myself moving through my loss. Not getting over, because I still have some really bad days, but slowly finding my way through. And in the process, healing that damaged relationship with my own inner knowing, rediscovering a bit of trust and confidence that had been undermined, and finding a sense of direction and perfect purpose in my life that hadn't been there before.
Yeah. Yeah. And having been through something similar, having to do with, well, with some people that were very close to me, I totally can understand that. It's getting to a point of, the past is the past, but it can get to, and it never leaves because it was there, right? It happened. But you get to a point where it no longer holds that, can't think what the right word is, but some, that feeling over you. It's like when you look back on it, you can look back on it without prejudice, to say, hey, that wasn't good, this was okay, but I can't redo it. So let's move on.
Well, and that's been an interesting part of the whole journey, is coming to understand that for the past to be the past, it first needs to be the present. And with this experience, the magnitude was so intense, and the depths of how it's affecting my life went so deep. The roots went so deep that there's kind of this leapfrogging experience that I'm going through, meaning allow a certain amount of what I went through come into the present, meaning I'm present to it in this moment, allowing it to be what it is, so that it can drift into the past. And when I do that, there's then another aspect in the queue that's waiting to come forward, right? Because I can't do it all at once.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the process that I've been going through the last couple of years has been this leapfrogging past and presenting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that happened 3 years ago, but I never really consciously opened to it, allowed it, welcomed it into the present. So let's do that work now. And a lot of it happens through meditation and community, but not all. Trauma therapy remains huge in this process.
Yeah.
It comes into the present until, like you said, the charge kind of fades a bit, and then it becomes part of the past, not gone, but what I've gone through. At which point, like I said, there's some other aspect of the experience, like, oh yeah, this thing from 6 years ago comes up. And then it's waiting, and then it goes back into the past, and something from a year and a half ago comes up. It's been very interesting in that regard, requiring a lot of flexibility, fluidity, and diligence, on my part.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So moving then into the present. How are you? Because it still kind of becomes the basis, or it's a piece of who you are and who you've been, and where you're coming from, and even though your direction now is different, which we can also talk about, how is all of that working, and with the people that that you are still working with?
Well, it's really interesting. When we talked before, I didn't understand what you had just pointed to, that all of this that had happened to me was in some ways, or is in some ways, acting as a foundation for what I'm doing right now. I
Mm.
didn't understand that. Maybe I hadn't worked through my experience enough to see and understand that. And having done that a little bit, and I'm going to underscore a little bit, I'm about 2.5 years into this healing journey. And very early on, someone who had been through something very similar with another community said, and they had been there for, I think, 22 years, so a similar length of time. They said, you really should give yourself 10 years for this. And of course, me being me at the time, I was like, 10 years, no way. And now 2.5 years in, it's like, yeah, 10 years seems really reasonable. Having begun to allow this experience, to acknowledge that this experience happened to me, and to allow that of course, it's going to affect the work that I do. There's been, I think, a subtle and notable shift. There's been a number of subtle and notable shifts, not the least of which in the way that I talk about my work. I mean, the sense of the purpose that I now feel involves educating, encouraging, and empowering people. And if you listen to the way I described my previous situation, education, encouragement, and empowerment were all, at least, towards the end with this close group of senior folks, lacking. So there's this sense of educating, encouraging, and empowering people, often in community, as I spoke to, in a supportive community, so that we can get a sense of the teachings and practices of meditation that's relevant to our lives, so that we can become more familiar with and present to our lives, so that we can welcome the wisdom that's inherent in our lives and let this inner wisdom guide us into our lives. And in some ways, that kind of understanding of meditation and the human journey was undermined in the previous situation by the leader-centric focus, because it wasn't about our inner wisdom. It was about the leader's impulses and whims and whatever it might be in this present moment. So that's a big shift, and to be in a place where I can speak to it in that way. Bringing meditation to life is how I often put it. The communities I host, the online gatherings, educate, encourage, empower, and support, so that we can bring the familiarity and knowing that we reconnect with in meditation into our lives. That's a very different formulation than I would have been able to speak to 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, evidently than I was able to speak to 6 months ago.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was just gonna say, isn't it amazing how it really doesn't take that long? It may take a long time to get through to the other side of it, right? But it doesn't take that long to just kind of take those first steps on the journey.
That's certainly one of the things that's just amazing. I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but that's another one of the things that's really amazed me about this is, as you said, those first steps, they're there for us. They may not be, I'll keep it personally, they've been there for me all the way. They may not be what I think they are. They may not be what I want them to be. But one of the things I've begun to realize is how resourced I am as a human being, and how resourced we all are as human beings, in that there is this inner knowing. The Buddhist tradition calls it Buddha nature, basic nature. There's this inner knowing that's built into us, which means it's there. So if we're having a good day or a bad day, if we're wearing glasses or no glasses, if our hair is long or short, gray shirt, green shirt, that inner knowing is there. And when we develop a relationship with it, it actually does offer us a sense of not the whole journey, as you said, but the next step. I need some trauma therapy. I need to go for a walk. I need to lie down. I need to start to speak to my experience in a more holistic and inclusive way, which means my experience at the end of this community, which is, that came out of this deepening relationship, or the healing of this relationship with the inner knowing, is that step okay, it's important to speak to this. It's important to say, this is what happened to me. This is how I'm recovering. And here's what things look like right now. So yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I couldn't make it up. It's just so amazing. And it's so affirming that that resourcefulness, someone called them spiritual resources to me recently. Those spiritual resources are there for us, and we can develop a relationship with them, and they can offer guidance in our everyday life. Wow.
Yeah. And then the kind of the neat thing as well is that you don't have to go through trauma to have it.
No.
And to take advantage of it. It's just that, isn't it nice that when you do experience a trauma, that it's still there for you?
Yeah. Yes.
And can start to lay a new foundation for you.
Yeah. And I love how you pointed out, we don't need to go through trauma to discover this, because it's always there. And I remember talking to a friend loosely along these lines, and their observation was, we just need to boil this down in a simple way, right? And I was like, well, how do you boil that down? And their comment was, well, when you go to a restaurant, there are all these options on the menu. How do you know which one you're to pick? You just know. That's an aspect of this inner knowing. Wow, that's a great and simple everyday example.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the other thing which I've also learned in the last couple of years, and really in my heart, that we all are okay, no matter what goes on out there, right? It's all out there, and we don't have to let it all in, number one. And number two, we can notice that it's not, a lot of it is not what we've created. Right? But we always think it was. We always blame ourselves. And sometimes it's our fault. Yeah. I'm not saying, that I'm an angel or anything like that. But, bottom line is, we're all okay. No matter what happens,
That's been so helpful in this whole process for me. To realize, like, let's imagine I'm going through a rough patch, and like I say, those still come up a lot. So I'm not feeling okay. I'm not feeling okay. What you point to has been so helpful. So here I am, not doing okay, not feeling okay, not thinking I'm okay. And, a recognition that in the midst of this, there's still can be moments of stillness. There still can be moments of openness. They still can be moments of insight. There still is a base level of okayness within the not okayness. And that recognition of that okayness, that fundamental okayness, does two things for me that I can think of. One, it really helps me relax that fundamental okayness, and a recognition and experience of it, even if it's just a sliver, lets me relax with the not okayness that I'm experiencing in my life right now. That's one thing. And to the extent it lets me relax, it lets me then see what the next step is. Right? So it's like so interesting to realize that connecting with this fundamental okayness, or healing that basic relationship, that had been so distorted in the last couple of years in my previous situation, beginning to heal that sense of basic okayness actually allows me to acknowledge and accept the not okayness of my life more fully, and find and follow the wisdom within that experience. That just blows my mind.
Yeah.
That just
Yeah.
blows my mind. And
Yeah.
again, meditation's been helpful in that. I know there's lots of other modalities that
Right.
offer us that kind of support and guidance. And community's been helpful in that. Just seeing other people do something similar,
Yeah.
or seeing other people really struggle and yet express something so brilliantly at the same
Mm,
time.
yeah. Yeah. And see other people, kind of waking up
Yeah.
to that inner wisdom, if you want to call it that, of that there is this part of us that's like I say is always okay.
Yeah.
You can pile on things and you can paint it different colors and you can do whatever you want, but it doesn't change.
Yeah. And I think I'm beginning to suspect that this may be something, I don't want to say unique because it's not unique. It may
Mm,
be something notable that spiritual practitioners, contemplative people of all stripes,
mm,
can actually bring to the contemporary world that we find ourselves in. I
mhm,
think we've got a lot of challenges we're facing, a lot of
mm,
not
yeah,
okayness. And I think we need all the human resources that we can possibly muster to meet them appropriately. And I'm
right.
beginning to feel more and more that part of that constellation of human resources that we
Mm,
need to muster includes a relationship to our basic okayness that contemplative practice allows us to nurture and
mhm,
launch from.
mhm,
Feel
mhm,
like that may be something. Again, it's not the only thing needed in this moment, but I feel like that may be a piece of the puzzle that maybe doesn't get a lot of acknowledgement, is contemplative folks and their relationship, bringing that relationship with basic okayness out into the world might be really, really helpful right
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And that right now people are just, they're all pointing fingers at other people and saying, you're stupid or you're this or, you know, and having that realization that we're all really the same and we're all
Yeah,
coming from the same place, um, just makes it a little less offensive. Let's put it that way. you
yeah,
know, that doesn't mean we all don't get angry or we don't get upset, but there's always this realization afterwards. It's like, okay, okay, you know, I don't need to go out and hit them or anything.
well, I think that's one of the big pluses. I mean, of or the big benefits of contemplative practice, spiritual
Yes.
practice, meditation
Hmm.
practice is
Hmm.
someone recently talked about the basic nature that I was speaking to in
Mm.
terms of space.
Hmm.
And that's certainly one of the qualities of this fundamental okayness that we
Hmm.
touch into through our practices. And he was observing that how this comes into his life is when he's driving. He said, someone cuts me off and I get really angry and I start
Yeah.
shaking my fist.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of space around that impulse
Yeah.
so that I don't actually act on it. And
Yes.
I see what else might be appropriate. And I mean, that's a very small, mundane example, considering the magnitude of some of the challenges that we're looking at.
Yeah.
But I do feel like that's a piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
I do feel
Yep.
like that ability to see an impulse
Yeah.
and actually have some space around that impulse
Yeah.
enough to just sort of pause and discern, okay, is this the appropriate action in this moment? Or is there
Hmm.
something else that's called for? I think that's
Yeah.
a huge shift and a
Yeah.
much needed shift.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I agree. It's the noticing.
Yeah.
It's the noticing when it comes up,
Yeah. Yeah. Being
in
able to
yourself
notice.
and in others. Yeah. And just say,
Well,
oh, okay, there it is again.
that's a great point. Seeing it come up in others and being familiar enough with the process that one can look and go, yeah, I know what that is. I know it's really painful. I know this isn't personal. I'm just going to cool my jets for a moment while you go through
Yeah.
your process.
Yeah. And you know what? Even if it is personal,
Mm, hmm
It's
Yeah.
still really outside of our control.
So
Just have to let the person calm down. So yeah, it's an interesting life is an interesting journey.
life is an interesting journey, an interesting practice, an interesting teacher. Yeah, I mean, who would have known?
Yeah,
Who
huh?
would have thought? I mean, it's interesting. Again, this is like interesting point number 17.
Yeah.
Go back to February 2020 and my departure from this 20-year relationship. And, to a certain extent, there was a feeling in me like, okay, this is over. I don't know what I meant by this. Like the journey's over, the
Mm,
path's over, the learning's over, the training's
mm,
over, the deepening's over, you know. And, what has turned out to be the case is, yeah, not by a long shot. Because in some ways, I feel like I've learned and developed and become familiar more in the last 2 years than, I don't know, any stretch of time I can recall in my recent
yeah.
past.
Yeah, it very much sounds like you've expanded in a lot of good ways.
And hopefully became a little
Yeah.
bit more helpful to this world of which I'm a part,
Mm, mm-hmm,
in doing
mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah, yeah,
That,
absolutely.
that's a big
Absolutely.
hope.
So you have a couple of new groups then that you're facilitating or
Yeah, there's the Living Meditation Network, which you
okay.
mentioned in the bio. That's
Mm-hmm.
a free to join community, which simply offers some resources.
Mm-hmm.
I post questions from time to
Mm,
time. I'll post talks. I'll post, images with little teachings attached. Just as a
uh-huh.
way for us to keep meditation front and center in our lives.
Yeah.
And then there is the online gatherings, which is a subscription-based community, which is
Mm-hmm.
really, I think, the heart and soul of the
Mm,
work that I'm doing right now. This is a group that has the option to meet 3 times a week by Zoom. And as I said, basically what we're doing is we are educating and encouraging and empowering one another in all the
mm,
ways that I spoke to a few minutes ago. And it's been probably one of the most affecting teaching and learning environments that
mm,
I've ever been part of. And that's one of the things that's really brilliant about it, is because there certainly is an aspect of the gatherings where I sit and I speak and it looks like a talk. And then there are other aspects. We used to call them Q&A, but that just doesn't
yeah.
capture it anymore. There are more discussions where we actually share our experiences, our
Okay.
struggles, our revelations, our discoveries,
Mm-hmm.
and teach one another in that way. So it's a teaching and a learning
Yeah.
environment for me. Someone a couple of days ago said, I noticed that your way you're teaching meditation has shifted subtly in the last few months. And I said, yeah, it has.
Uh,
They said, where did that come from? And I said, well, from what someone in the group pointed out. And I realized
uh-huh.
it was right on the money. And so this is one of the things I love about the gatherings is there's this almost a collegial atmosphere where, again, the fundamental assumption is we all have this basic wisdom. So if we all have this basic wisdom,
Yeah.
maybe we all have a little bit of something to say about the meditative journey and the
Yeah.
human journey more broadly. Maybe.
Yeah.
I still think there's a role for texts and traditions and teachers and
Oh
guides.
yeah. No.
And I think there can be a lot more room for the wisdom that exists within in all of us.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, I agree. I agree. And I think where the text and all of that comes in is in helping all of us have our own insights into
Yeah.
and understanding into the understanding of
Yeah.
ourselves, of who we are and how we work.
And I think that's been a big shift for me, a shift
Mm,
from an understanding of the texts being kind of the tradition being the front end of the edge of the wedge,
mm-hmm,
and our individual practitioner experience following,
mm-hmm.
to our individual practitioner experience being the front edge of the wedge, and the texts and the
Mm,
traditions and the teachers and the guides following, offering
okay.
support and familiarity as necessary and as appropriate.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's been a huge shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
And an empowering,
Yeah.
encouraging and empowering shift.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I know, even from my point of view, right? It's everything around having insights. It's like that's when we learn, and when we really embody things, is when we have the insight.
Yeah.
You can tell me all about your insights all the time, and I'm not going to change a damn bit, right?
Yeah.
But have a discussion, read a book, I may read one sentence and go, boom, mind blown. Life changed.
Yeah.
And you read the same one, you're like, what? Where did she get that from? Right?
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing that so many people don't understand. They're always looking to somebody else to tell them, what they should do or how they should do it, or, give me advice.
Well, those of your listeners who are listening, as opposed to watching right now, will not see me putting up my hand in affirmation of that.
Yes.
There's certainly, I don't want to, for me, there was something comforting and affirming and familiar and knowable in that approach. And there's probably some value in that approach to a certain extent at a certain point, at certain points in time. However, I think what you're pointing to is at a certain point, I think we all, as practitioners and contemplative people, we need to be at the bow of the boat. Right? As it needs to, our insight, because our insights are the vehicle of transformation, not what we read in a book. And it's interesting. I think it's easy for me to mistake that if I'm reading a book and there's this insight, mind blown, I often think, oh, it's the book, but it's not the book. It's the mind blown. It's that embodied experience. It reminds me, there's a socio-cultural historian by the name of Morris Berman, and he's written a whole bunch of books. And for the life of me, I can't remember whether he was writing about a personal experience or whether this was his grandfather's experience. So let's assume it's Berman's experience. And he was going to Hebrew school, first day of Hebrew school. They got handed slates to, and they were going to learn the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which to my understanding is Aleph.
Yeah, Aleph.
Aleph
is the way it's pronounced. Yeah, Aleph.
And so the teacher then handed out honey, and each of the students was to dip their finger in honey and put the letter on the slate and then lick the honey off the slate.
Okay.
And the teacher's point was, that's wisdom.
Yeah.
When we take it in and allow it to integrate into ourselves and affect our lives, that's wisdom.
Yeah.
Love that story.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Yeah, I know. I've been coaching on and off for the last few years, and I just started not just a few months ago, became a part of a new group that's called the Inside Coaching Community. And that's the basis of all of it, is that when you coach people, you don't tell them what they should be doing. You ask questions, you be curious, and you reflect back to them what they're saying, so that they can have their own insights.
Yeah. That's so great.
And it has been, talk about mind-blowing. It has really been mind-blowing, because we do a lot of practicing within ourselves, within our group besides, right? And there have been some of them myself that is just like, oh shit, oh yeah, oh my God.
I know
seeing other people, it's just, it's so fun.
I know in my own mentoring work, it's one of the moments I so cherish is
Yeah.
those moments where, and it's like you said, as a coach, as a mentor, as a guide, one
Yeah.
reflects back what the other person has said.
Uh-huh.
So their words, their
Yes.
phrasing, their images,
Yes.
and there's a shift,
Yeah, you can see
a
it.
mind blowing
Yeah.
based upon what they've actually offered, not upon any
Yeah.
wisdom or intelligence on our parts,
No, I know.
on the wisdom that's coming out of
Yeah.
their necessarily unique human experiences. I always feel like I'm going to fall off the chair in those moments
Yeah.
because it's so deeply affecting, deeply affecting.
Yeah. 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 It really is. It really is. It's like watching a life change.
And
Yeah.
affirming. I mean, just
Oh, yes.
affirming. We keep coming back to this, affirming of our basic human intelligence. And yeah, I
Absolutely.
think we all know that we cover it up with all sorts of this and that and the other thing. Fair enough. And we do need to look at that and we do need to work with that.
Mm,
But I think the ground, though, and this goes back to something you said a few minutes ago, the ground,
mm,
though, is affirming that that's there and
mhm,
acknowledging the moments when it's showing up
mhm,
so that we
mhm,
can relax more and more with who we are and let that happen more and more often.
mhm. Yep. Yep. I totally agree.
And so that we can feel okay about taking on those clouds and obscurations and distortions that are part
That's
of it,
right.
so that we don't make the mistake of thinking that because there's a distortion of the way we're seeing things that we're bad people, because we're not. It just means
Hmm.
there's a distortion in the way we're seeing things.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree. Well, is there anything else you would like to say just to kind of wrap up all of this and your journey and
Yeah.
and we were talking earlier about health and wellness and how that all kind of comes together in that broad, very, very, very broad
Yeah.
subject.
Well, as I've been, getting ready for this conversation,
Uh-huh.
which has been wonderful again, thank you very much, and
Thank
very,
you.
very rich. Thank you. As I was getting ready for this, I was thinking about the title, Healthy Tips After 50. And I'm after 50.
Yeah.
I've been after 50 through this whole experience. And
Yeah.
for me, one of the things I've come to understand is that being healthy after 50, so mature health and well-being, understanding it in a very broad way, as you put it, seems to include acknowledging what I've been through in life,
Mm,
accepting what I've been through in life,
mm,
and then letting the wisdom that's inherent in that experience um, begin to guide me in the world in a way
mm,
that benefits myself, benefits others, benefits all.
mhm.
That there is this broader notion, understanding, and experience of healthy than I had 2.5 years ago. And this is now something that I'm trying to embody in my personal life and embody in my work and
Yeah.
help others do the same. Basically,
Hmm.
acknowledge, accept, and let the wisdom flow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. Very nice.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to revisit or the podcast and kind of
Yeah.
offer this fleshed out kind of from my end anyway, deeper, richer
Yeah.
sense of what it is that
Uh-huh.
I have been doing and what it is that I am doing.
Yeah. No, I would like that. I would like that definitely for
Yeah.
you to come back on again
Yeah. Well, who
for
knows where
sure.
things will be in 6 months.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's very true for all of us.
Yeah. Very true.
It only takes one day to change your life, right?
Well put. Yeah. That's all it takes.
Okay, well, with that, I will wrap up and say that neither of us are doctors, and this is not to be seen as medical advice. And if you are having some issues along that line of medical problems, please call your own doctor, go to the emergency room, or whatever is appropriate. And so I will say thank you again to Neil. And thank you to all of you listeners, and I will talk to all of you next week. Hello, everyone. This is Susan. I hope you enjoyed this wonderful interview. And if you'd like to talk more about this topic or are looking for your own breakthrough, I'm an insight coach, and I would love to gift you a session so we can talk more about this. You can reach me by sending an email to Susan at healthytipsafter50.com. I'm sure you recognize that name. Talk to you soon.